My name is Marlowe Sinclair, and I am 33 years old. Most of the world thinks my story ended a year ago, buried under the rubble of a failed startup and a mountain of debt, but they're wrong. They thought they were hiring a forgotten failure to answer their phones, a ghost to haunt the lobby of their glass and steel monument to victory. They never imagined they were inviting a Trojan horse through their front gates, one that would bring their entire empire crashing down from the inside. The day my company died felt like the end of the world. It was called Aetherius, and it was more than a business. It was my heart, my soul, my everything poured into lines of code and circuit boards. We were on the verge of closing a Series A funding round that would have changed everything. Then, overnight, the deal collapsed. Our lead investor pulled out, citing a sudden, inexplicable loss of confidence. But it wasn't inexplicable, it was sabotage. Julian Vance, the CEO of our biggest rival, Omnicorp, had swooped in, not to invest but to poison the well. He had whispered lies into the right ears, casting doubt on our technology, our scalability, our very existence. And it worked. Aetherius bled out in a matter of weeks. The final injustice wasn't just the failure, it was the smug, dismissive look on Julian's face when I confronted him at an industry mixer weeks later. "It's just business, Marlowe," he'd said, a cold smile playing on his lips. "Maybe you're just not cut out for the big leagues." That sentence became the flint against which I would sharpen my resolve. So, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told you're not good enough, hit that like button. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because this story is for anyone who has ever dreamed of a comeback. And don't forget to subscribe because you won't want to miss how this ends. My journey in the tech world had always been a fight upstream. From the very beginning, Omnicorp was the industry's golden child. They were born with a silver spoon in their mouth, incubated in a prestigious university lab with millions in seed funding before they'd even written a single line of viable code. The tech journals fawned over them, venture capitalists threw money at them, and talented engineers flocked to their campus-like headquarters with its gourmet cafeterias and nap pods. They were everything I wasn't. Aetherius was born in my cramped apartment, funded by my life savings and a second mortgage on my parents' house. My desk was a piece of plywood on 2 sawhorses. My team consisted of 2 other true believers who were willing to work for equity and ramen noodles. We didn't have a campus, we had a shared workspace with spotty Wi-Fi and a coffee machine that was perpetually broken. While Omnicorp was featured on the cover of magazines, we were hustling for a tiny blurb in a niche tech blog. Every milestone we hit was a war won. Every small victory was monumental. We celebrated our first 100 users like it was 1,000,000. We pulled all-nighters fixing bugs that Omnicorp would have a whole team of salaried engineers to handle. They had resources, we had resourcefulness, they had pedigree, we had passion. I was the scrappy underdog, the afterthought in an industry that only paid attention to the giants, and no giant was bigger or more lauded than Julian Vance's Omnicorp. I wasn't entirely alone in those early days, though. I had one person who saw the fire in me when everyone else saw a fool's errand. Professor Alistair Finch had been my thesis advisor in college. He was a brilliant, kind man with a shock of white hair and eyes that twinkled with relentless curiosity. He had been the one to encourage my initial idea, the one that would eventually become Aetherius. He invested a small, but to him significant, amount of his own pension into my company. It was less about the money and more about the statement, "I believe in you." When things were at their bleakest, when a server would crash or a potential client would laugh me out of their office, I would call Alistair. He wouldn't offer easy platitudes. He would listen, a long, thoughtful silence on the other end of the line, and then he would say something that would recenter my entire universe. "Marlowe," he told me once, his voice a calm anchor in my storm of anxiety. "The pressure you are under is immense, but remember, pressure is what turns coal into diamonds. Do not resent the pressure. Use it." His words became a mantra. The neglect from the wider industry, the constant struggle for resources, it didn't just make me tough, it made me versatile. At Omnicorp, employees were cogs in a massive machine. There was a vice president of synergy and a director of ideation. People had titles so specific they probably only understood their own job description. At Aetherius, I was the CEO, the lead coder, the marketing department, the head of HR, and the janitor. I had to learn finance to balance our books, law to draft our early contracts, and public relations to write my own press releases. This forced education was brutal. It meant sacrificing my social life, my sleep, my health. But it gave me a holistic understanding of the tech business that Julian Vance, sitting in his ivory tower surrounded by sycophants, could never comprehend. He knew how to command an army. I knew how to build one from scratch, how to feed it, how to arm it, and how to heal its wounds. The hardship was a crucible, burning away everything but the essential skills I needed to survive. I didn't know it then, but this grueling hands-on education was forging the very weapon I would one day use to bring him to his knees. The pressure was, indeed, creating a diamond. A very, very hard one. The final straw wasn't a single piece of hay. It was an entire bale dropped on my back from a great height. We had been courting a major venture capital firm, Westwood Partners, for months. They were the key. Their investment would not only secure our finances, but would also give us the stamp of legitimacy we desperately needed. I had poured everything into the pitch. I had personally refined our prototype, running simulations until 3 a.m, making sure it was flawless. My co-founders and I had rehearsed our presentation until we could do it in our sleep. The final meeting was a success. We could feel it. The partners were nodding, asking the right questions, their eyes lit with the unmistakable gleam of profit. They asked us to send over our proprietary source code for final due diligence, a standard, if nerve-wracking, part of the process. We were hesitant, but our lawyer assured us the non-disclosure agreement was ironclad. We sent it. A week later, Westwood Partners went radio silent. My calls went to voicemail. My emails went unanswered. Then, the real betrayal hit. My lead developer, a brilliant coder named Dev Shah, whom I'd mentored since he was an intern, resigned. He couldn't even look me in the eye. He just mumbled something about an offer he couldn't refuse. The next day, Omnicorp announced Dev had joined their team as a senior architect. 2 days after that, Westwood Partners formally passed on our funding round, citing concerns about the long-term viability of the core technology. It was a lie. They hadn't found a flaw in our tech. They had been swayed by a snake. I knew, with a certainty that was cold and hard in the pit of my stomach, what had happened. Julian Vance had caught wind of our deal. He'd approached Westwood, his biggest and most loyal investor, and warned them off. Then he'd poached Dev, not just for his talent, but for the knowledge inside his head. He had effectively decapitated my company and stolen its crown jewel in one swift, ruthless move. The collapse was swift and brutal. Without the funding, we couldn't make payroll. I had to lay off the team, the people who had believed in me. That was the hardest day of my life, watching the light go out in their eyes as I told them it was over. Then came the creditors, the legal notices, the gut-wrenching process of liquidating our assets for pennies on the dollar. I lost everything, the company, the money, my apartment. I had to sell my car to pay the final legal fees. I was adrift, a captain without a ship, a ghost in my own life. The emotional pain was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. It was during this period of absolute desolation that I ran into Julian Vance at that industry mixer. I hadn't planned to go, but a friend dragged me out, thinking it would be good for me to get back out there. Seeing him hold court, laughing with the same VCs who had abandoned me, was like swallowing glass. I walked up to him, my hands shaking, and asked him why. He looked at me, a flicker of recognition in his cold eyes, and then he delivered that line. "It's just business, Marlowe. Maybe you're just not cut out for the big leagues." He turned his back on me and walked away, leaving me standing there, shattered. That night, I hit rock bottom. I sat in the tiny, sublet room I was renting, surrounded by boxes of my former life, and I just let the despair wash over me. I thought about giving up, about leaving the tech world forever, about becoming a barista or a bookstore clerk, anything that didn't involve this level of pain and betrayal. I called the only person I could, Professor Alistair Finch. I sobbed into the phone, a torrent of failure and rage and humiliation. He listened patiently, as he always did. When I was finished, there was a long pause. He said, "You weren't cut out for the big leagues?" Alistair finally asked, his voice soft but with an edge of steel. "Yes," I whispered. "Well," he said, and I could almost hear the twinkle in his eye. "Perhaps he's right. Perhaps you're not meant for his league. Perhaps you're meant to create a new one entirely." His words didn't fix anything, but they shifted something deep inside me. The despair began to recede, replaced by a cold, quiet anger. It was a clean, pure fury. I hung up the phone and opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for jobs in other cities or other industries. On a whim, I typed Omnicorp careers into the search bar. I scrolled past the listings for software engineers and project managers, my heart pounding with a mad idea, and then I saw it, a low-level, high-turnover position. A job no one with ambition would ever want, front desk receptionist, San Francisco headquarters. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was perfect. It was humiliating. It was insane. It was the only way. They wouldn't be looking for me there. I would be invisible, a ghost in the machine, a ghost who could listen, who could watch, and who could learn every single one of their secrets. In that moment, sitting on a cardboard box in a borrowed room, my decision was made. I would not run. I would not hide. I would get my revenge. Julian Vance had invited me to the big leagues. I was about to walk in through the front door and burn his stadium to the ground. The first day as Omnicorp's receptionist was the longest day of my life. The uniform was a polyester blazer in a nauseating shade of corporate blue, tight across the shoulders and instantly suffocating. My workstation was an island of beige plastic in a cavernous marble lobby, designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. It worked just as well on the employees. I felt like a bug under a microscope. The path to this particular circle of hell had been arduous. I'd had to sell my high-end laptop, my last real connection to my old life, to afford the deposit on a dingy studio apartment, a grueling hour-and-a-half bus ride away from the Omnicorp tower. My diet consisted of instant noodles and protein bars. Sleep was a luxury, stolen in short, anxious bursts between the blare of sirens on the street outside and the roar of my own churning thoughts. Every day was a battle against my own pride, a constant, gnawing reminder of how far I had fallen. I, who had once pitched to boards of directors, was now practicing a bright, empty smile in a cracked bathroom mirror. The contrast between my new life and the world I now inhabited was a daily assault. The employees of Omnicorp existed in a bubble of obscene privilege. They strolled in at 10 in the morning, holding cups of $5 coffee, complaining about the lackluster foam on their lattes. They talked about weekend ski trips to Tahoe and summer villas in Tuscany. They catered lunches every day: sushi, gourmet tacos, artisanal salad. Sand threw away more food than I ate in a week. I watched them from my desk, a silent, invisible observer. They treated me not as a person, but as a piece of furniture that occasionally spoke. They'd drop their mail on my desk without making eye contact, bark orders for a courier, or complain to me when their guest was a minute late. One of the vice presidents, a man named Carter, once flicked a piece of lint at me and said, "Clean that up, would you, love?" I did. I cleaned it up, my fake smile plastered on my face while my insides burned with a rage so hot it was almost transcendent. I was a ghost, and ghosts see everything. But in that cold, sterile environment, a strange thing began to happen. I wasn't the only ghost. I started to notice the others, the people who, like me, were invisible to the Carters of the world. There was Leo, a junior technician from the IT department. He was a lanky kid with glasses always perched on the end of his nose, constantly run ragged by executives who couldn't remember their own passwords but demanded instant service. He'd often stop by my desk to vent, his voice a low mutter, complaining about the sheer incompetence he dealt with daily. "They have a $1,000 phone and use it like a rock," he'd grumble. I swear this whole place runs on duct tape and my tears. Then there was Clara, an executive assistant from the third floor who had been with the company for 15 years. She had a quiet dignity about her, but her eyes held a deep, weary sadness. She was overlooked for promotions in favor of younger, flashier candidates, and her encyclopedic knowledge of the company's inner workings was taken for granted. She saw how I was treated and showed me small kindnesses: a shared chocolate bar, a quiet word of encouragement, a tip about which executives to avoid before they'd had their morning coffee. Leo, Clara, and I formed a small, unspoken alliance of the overlooked. We were the support staff, the engine room of the starship, invisible to the captains on the bridge but essential to its function. They didn't know my story, not the full truth of it, but they recognized a kindred spirit in my quiet observation and my refusal to be broken by the daily condescension. They became my new network, my chosen family inside the belly of the beast. And from my beige throne, I began my real work. Being a receptionist was like having a backstage pass to the entire company. I saw every visitor who came and went, venture capitalists, potential partners, engineers from rival companies being poached. I signed for every package, logged every courier, and saw memos that were meant to be confidential but were left carelessly on the printer next to my desk. My greatest weapon was the conversations I overheard. People talked freely in the lobby, assuming the woman at the desk was just part of the decor. They discussed deadlines, product flaws, and internal politics. I kept a small, coded notebook, jotting down every scrap of information. I learned the name of their next big project, Project Chimera. It was their moonshot, a revolutionary new platform that was supposed to redefine the industry. It was also, I quickly gathered from stressed-out engineers and hushed, angry phone calls, a complete and utter mess. The project was behind schedule, over budget, and built on a fundamentally flawed architecture. The lead architect, me, former developer, dev was, apparently struggling to integrate the core systems. It was a classic Omnicorp problem, a brilliant concept hobbled by arrogant management, bloated bureaucracy, and a refusal to listen to the people on the ground. This was the first fruit of my labor. This was their weakness. Project Chimera wasn't a moonshot, it was a Death Star with a fatal thermal exhaust port. And I, the humble receptionist, was the only one who had the complete blueprints. While Omnicorp was bleeding money into its failing behemoth, I was squirreling away every spare dollar I earned. My tiny apartment became my secret headquarters. The plywood and sawhorse desk made a comeback. After my 10-hour shifts of smiling and routing calls, I would take the long bus ride home, gulp down a meager dinner, and then the real work would begin. I started coding again. I wasn't rebuilding Aetherius, that name was tainted with failure. This was something new. Something leaner, meaner, and built for a single purpose, to do what Project Chimera promised, but to do it right. I called it Nemesis. It was an audacious, almost insane undertaking for one person. But I wasn't just one person. I had the collective, unwitting knowledge of my enemy. I knew their architecture because I'd heard their engineers complaining about it. I knew their timeline because I'd scheduled the crisis meetings. I knew their user interface was clunky because I'd seen the frustrated mock-ups left on a designer's stray tablet. After 3 months of this double life, I had a working prototype. It was rough, but it was elegant. It solved the core problem that Chimera was stumbling over with a fraction of the code and processing power. I took it to the only person I knew I could trust, Professor Alistair Finch. I met him at a quiet cafe, looking more like a tired waitress than a tech visionary in my worn-out clothes. I opened my old laptop and showed him. He watched, silent and intense, as I walked him through the demo. When I was finished, he closed the laptop gently and looked at me, his eyes shining. "Marlowe," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "this isn't just a comeback. This is a resurrection." He didn't just offer praise, he offered a lifeline. He liquidated a portion of his stock portfolio and gave me a seed investment enough to hire a small team and rent a proper office. My first 2 calls were to Leo and Clara. I told them everything. Leo's eyes went wide with disbelief, then with a fierce conspiratorial grin. Clara simply nodded, a slow, determined smile spreading across her face. "I've been waiting 15 years for a reason to quit," she said. "When do we start?" This was my first major victory, a quiet triumph savored in a cheap cafe, a world away from the gleaming tower where I still answered phones. The turning point came from the most unexpected of sources. Dev Shah, my former developer, the prodigal son who had betrayed me for Omnicorp's gold, was in trouble. Project Chimera was collapsing around him. The launch date was looming, and the platform was riddled with critical bugs they couldn't fix. The flaw was deep in the architectural level, a problem born from the stolen, misunderstood fragments of my original Aetherius design. He was trying to build a castle on a foundation of sand. Out of sheer desperation, he did something I never expected. He reached out. He didn't call my old number, he sent a message to my professional networking profile, a dusty digital tombstone I hadn't updated in a year. The message was terse. "Marlowe, I know we didn't part on the best terms, but I need your help, a consultation. I'm hitting a wall on a project here, and honestly, you're the only one I know who thinks this way. Name your price." I stared at the message on my phone, standing behind the reception desk. The irony was so thick I could taste it. The man who had helped destroy my company was now begging for my expertise, completely unaware that he was begging it from the woman who handed him his visitor's pass every morning. I didn't reply to the message. Instead, the next time he passed my desk, looking haggard and defeated, I caught his eye. "Long night?" I asked, my voice pitched with the bland pleasantness of a good receptionist. He grunted, not really seeing me, but a seed was planted. I started leaving articles open on my browser about obscure architectural solutions, the very ones I was using for Nemesis. I'd make a point of being on a personal call, talking loudly enough for him to overhear as I discussed complex coding problems with my brother. Slowly, agonizingly for him, he started to see me, not as Marlowe Sinclair, the failed founder, but as the surprisingly knowledgeable receptionist. He started stopping by, ostensibly to chat but really to pick my brain. It was a delicate dance. I fed him just enough to make him think he was solving the problems himself, all while gathering even more detailed intelligence on Chimera's internal chaos. He was my mole, and he didn't even know it. His awakening wasn't one of conscience, but of desperation. He began to see the injustice not of what he did to me, but of how Omnicorp's bloated, arrogant culture was strangling his own talent. He was coming to respect me, the receptionist, more than he respected his own CEO. Meanwhile, Julian Vance and his coterie of executives remained blissfully, stupendously oblivious. They would walk past my desk daily, their conversations loud and self-congratulatory. They were planning the launch of Project Chimera at the annual Tech Vanguard conference, the biggest event of the year. It was to be the keynote address, the crowning achievement of Omnicorp's dominance. Julian, on more than one occasion, saw me and smirked. Once, while waiting for the elevator, he looked at my name tag and said, "Marlowe Sinclair. I remember you. Ethereus, right? Tough break. Still, looks like you landed on your feet. Good for you." He patted the reception desk as if it were a dog's head. Everyone finds their level eventually. He had no idea the woman he was patronizing was about to engineer a seismic shift in his entire industry. The invitation arrived via a company-wide email. All Omnicorp employees were invited to watch the live stream of the Tech Vanguard keynote. A select few were invited to attend in person to provide support. My manager told me I'd be needed at the venue to help run the check-in desk for Omnicorp's private after-party. The stage was set. Julian Vance was about to give the speech of his life, celebrating his ultimate triumph. He had no idea I had also booked a presentation hall at the very same conference right next door, under the unassuming company name Nemesis Solutions. The final confrontation was no longer a dream. It was an appointment in my calendar. The day of the Tech Vanguard conference was electric. The air in the convention center buzzed with anticipation. I spent the morning in my corporate blue blazer, checking in guests for Omnicorp's party, my smile as bright and fake as the plastic name badge clipped to my lapel. My own presentation was scheduled for the slot immediately following Julian Vance's keynote. Leo and Clara were already in our hall, running final checks, their text messages a frantic, excited drumbeat on my silent phone. Just before he was due on stage, Julian Vance swept through the lobby with his entourage. He was radiant, soaking in the adulation of the crowd. He spotted me at the check-in desk, and a cruel, triumphant smirk spread across his face. He strode over, not to check in, but to deliver one final, public twist of the knife. He leaned in conspiratorially, his voice loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "Sinclair, still at the front desk I see," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You know, it takes a certain kind of person to aim for the stars and miss so spectacularly, but hey, some people just aren't cut out for the big leagues. At least you get a front row seat to see how it's done." He winked, then turned to the small crowd that had gathered, who offered a few sycophantic chuckles. He thought he was delivering the final insult. He was actually delivering my opening monologue. I didn't react. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. I just gave him a calm, serene smile. "Good luck with your presentation, Julian," I said, my voice even. "I hope it goes exactly as you deserve." His smirk faltered for a second, confused by my placid response, but the roar of the crowd calling him to the main stage quickly erased his doubt. He turned and walked toward his moment of glory. My moment was next. As soon as he was out of sight, I unclipped my Omnicorp badge, dropped it in a trash can, and walked toward the hall where Nemesis was about to be born. Julian's keynote was a masterclass in corporate hubris. He strutted across the stage, painting a grandiose vision of the future, all powered by Project Chimera. He promised it would revolutionize everything from data processing to artificial intelligence. Then came the live demo. It started well enough, with a flashy graphical interface. But as he tried to run a complex data query, the system lagged. An error message flashed on the giant screen behind him for a split second before a technician could hide it. The demonstration faltered. He tried to laugh it off, blaming the convention center's Wi-Fi, but the damage was done. A murmur of skepticism rippled through the audience of industry experts. They could smell blood in the water. As his presentation limped to an awkward conclusion, a notification pinged on the phones of every attendee, pushed by the official conference app. Surprise launch announcement: join Nemesis Solutions in Hall B for the unveiling of a new paradigm in computational architecture. Starting now, a river of people, intrigued by the promise of something new and sensing the failure in the main hall, began to flow toward my presentation. I walked on stage as Julian was walking off his, our paths nearly crossing. The look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated shock. He saw me, not in a receptionist's blazer, but in a sharp, dark suit, standing on a stage that was, until that moment, supposed to be his. I took the microphone and looked out at the packed room. For years, I began, my voice clear and strong. We've been told that progress requires massive, bloated systems. That innovation belongs only to the biggest players with the deepest pockets. Today, I'm here to tell you that's a lie. I unveiled Nemesis. It was flawless. The live demo ran complex simulations that made Chimera's attempts look like a child's calculator. It was faster, more efficient, more stable, and I showed them why. My team and I built Nemesis by anticipating the very bottlenecks and architectural flaws that plague legacy systems. I explained, clicking to a slide that showed a simplified but damning schematic of Chimera's core problem. We learned from the mistakes of others. In fact, I learned most of what I needed to know while working as a receptionist at Omnicorp. A collective gasp went through the hall. The public revelation was a lightning strike. A well-known tech journalist, a woman named Kara Swisher, who was famous for her incisive questions, stood up. "Mr. Vance," she called out, her voice cutting across the stunned silence toward the main hall where he was still reeling. "Is it true? Did your own receptionist just obsolete your flagship product?" All cameras swung to Julian. He was pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He was publicly, catastrophically undone. The shifting of allegiances was immediate and absolute. In the front row of my audience, Professor Alistair Finch was on his feet, beaming, tears in his eyes. On stage with me, I brought out my co-founders. Leo, the forgotten IT tech, took a bow. Clara, the overlooked executive assistant, waved to the cheering crowd. They were my team. They were my victory. From the stunned audience of Omnicorp employees, I saw Dev. He looked at me, his face a mixture of awe and profound regret. He gave a slow, deliberate nota concession, an apology, a sign of respect. Julian Vance was left standing alone on his now darkened stage, a king in a collapsed kingdom, as the entire world of tech swarmed me, his ghost, his creation, his nemesis. The aftermath was even more decisive than the climax. Nemesis wasn't just a success, it was a phenomenon. We were the darlings of the tech world, the giant killers who had rewritten the rules. Our story was on the cover of every magazine that had once fawned over Omnicorp. We were flooded with investment offers, partnership proposals, and resumes from the best and brightest engineers in the industry, including a flood of applications from shell-shocked Omnicorp employees desperate to jump from a sinking ship. Omnicorp, in contrast, entered a death spiral. The public humiliation at Tech Vanguard shattered their stock price. Clients began pulling their contracts. Key executives, seeing the writing on the wall, abandoned Julian Vance, leaving him to preside over the smoldering ruins of his empire. My new life was everything my old life was not. It was successful, it was respected, and it was built entirely on my own terms. I was no longer the scrappy underdog begging for scraps. I was the one setting the table. I worked from a bright, airy office with my loyal teamy chosen family by my side. Leo was now my chief technology officer, his brilliance finally unleashed. Clara was my chief operating officer, her quiet competence now the engine that drove our entire company. We were a testament to the power of the underestimated. About 6 months after the conference, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Julian Vance. His voice was different, stripped of its arrogance, thin and reedy. He didn't yell or threaten, he pleaded. He talked about salvaging his company, about the legacy he had built. He clumsily attempted an apology, framing his sabotage of Aetherius as a competitive misstep. Then came the real reason for his call, a desperate, pathetic offer to have Nemesis acquire Omnicorp, to merge our companies and combine our strengths. It was the last, dying gasp of a defeated man. I agreed to a meeting, not for him but for me. We met in a neutral conference room at a hotel. He looked older, smaller. I listened silently as he laid out his proposal, a pathetic attempt to cling to some sliver of his former glory. When he was finished, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply looked him in the eye and established the new reality. No, Julian, I said, my voice calm and final. I am not interested in your company. I'm not interested in a partnership, and I am not interested in your apology. I stood up, the power dynamic in the room having been permanently and irrevocably inverted. Nemesis might be interested in acquiring your patents and physical assets once your bankruptcy proceedings are complete, I told him, delivering the final clinical blow. My legal team will be in touch with your receivers. But you and I have no further business. I walked out of the room without looking back, leaving him to drown in the silence. The forgiveness he sought was not mine to give, because the injury was something I had already transformed into strength. It was fuel I had long since burned. The key lesson I learned through all of this is that failure is not a destination, it is a catalyst. The world will constantly try to tell you your worth, to put you in a box, to assign you a role receptionist, failure, afterthought, but your value is not determined by their assessment. It is forged in your own fire, proven by your own resilience. The humiliation I endured, the rage I felt, I didn't let it consume me. I channeled it. I turned poison into power. The family you choose, the allies who see you when you feel invisible, can be more powerful than any corporate ladder or established institution. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had to find strength in a moment of utter defeat? What was the final straw that made you decide to build a new life on your own terms? Share your story in the comments below, because every story of resilience deserves to be heard. And please, don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories. Remember, they can knock you down, but they can only keep you down if you let them. Your greatest victory is not in proving them wrong, it's in proving yourself right.